Hello and welcome to part one of our 5-part series about 5 conversations, the key to transforming trust, engagement and performance at work. We're really pleased to have you with us today. My name is Andy Dent. I'm one of the directors here at the Oxford Group, and I have the pleasure to work with a great team of people that serve up innovative solutions and added value content to our clients. And a big part of my work over the last 5 years has been related to 5 conversations. So being involved in designing, developing, evolving and delivering the program to many clients all around the world. And it's had a great impact on me personally in terms of my leadership and also on many of those organizations that we've worked with over the years. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague who's with us today, Maggie.
Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome. I'm really pleased to be here today. I'm an associate director with the Oxford Group. I've worked here for 17 years, which is quite scary when I say that out loud. Part of my role really is to connect some of the great work that we do with clients and help our clients deliver on their needs and outcomes. And I love what we do, and I particularly enjoy 5 conversations. I've been involved in 5 conversations really since its inception. I was around when we did some early work with AstraZeneca on the topic. And if anybody has the really old version of the book, my name is in there because I contributed to it along the way. So I'm really pleased to just share with you. We're going to talk about conversation 1 today, Andy. So I'm pleased to share that with you. A tiny little bit about the Oxford Group before we do start. The Oxford Group, as many of you may know, is a leadership and management development and executive coaching company. We're global. We operate in, well, I don't know how many countries, 35, 40, 50 countries around the world. We've got about 200 facilitators, and we've been in existence for 35 years. So we've learned a lot along the way, and we're learning every day since we began.
Excellent. Thanks, Maggie. So I guess the first question to kick off with, as this conversation is all about trust, is what is so important about trust?
I know we've talked about this at length, Andy, but I think I always start the answer to this one is, where do I start? I guess for me, trust really is sort of the basis for getting things done at work. It's a really sort of a basic requirement, a basic need. And when I was thinking about doing this session and sharing some of our insights, I just remembered about 6 or 7 weeks ago, Andy, when you asked me, would you get involved in this session, Maggie? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. And Andy said, come on, you'll be great. And actually, I decided to trust Andy, and I could trust Andy because Andy and I have worked together for quite a long time. Andy generally does what he says says he's going to do. He's very supportive. He's real, I guess. He's real and genuine. So if Andy says it'll be okay, it'll probably be okay. So here I am today, I guess, because I trust you, because I trust the system, and I trust the work that we do. So I'm in this session to share some of that.
Well, thank you, Maggie. And I think the camera's sparing some of my blushes there. But yeah, I mean, trust is one of those things. It's one of those intangible things. We often, and we'll get into that in a little bit in terms of what is trust. But it's one of those things we know when we've got it because we feel it, but putting our finger on exactly what it is really, really difficult to do so very often. And I think for me, one of the things that we talk about is the leadership shadow, the shadow that you can cast without even realizing it as a manager or a leader in an organization. You're always on show, and people are looking at the things that you do and the things that you don't do. And whether you intentionally, which I don't think many people do, or unintentionally bring threats into the system, into people's psyche. So that's one thing that's really important, is just to be mindful of the things that you're saying or not saying, and how that might play out in terms of whether people move towards you or whether some of those things push people away also. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts from you, Maggie, just to push that forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the slide here shares a few reasons why building trust is important. But for me, I think as managers and as colleagues, as leaders in organizations, I think we all have a responsibility to accelerate the trust that we've got in the relationships with the people that we work with, and to take some time out and think about it, because I genuinely believe where there's trust, there's action and performance, and that trust can cut through a lot of challenge, and can cut through a lot of time actually in explaining things, in justifying things, when people know that you've got their back, that they are, we use the term psychologically safe. You're not going to get blamed. There's nothing, there's no negative implication when something doesn't get done, only an opportunity to learn. For me, that's when performance happens, and that's what this is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things to add really is we've all got a great threat detector in ourselves, in our brain, called the amygdala, which sniffs out any threat or any insincerity, which is why it's so important for people to be authentic in the work that they do. And one of the things that happens if the amygdala is spiked and there isn't trust present in a relationship, then what it does, it puts all of the blood flow in the brain to areas that are just focused on protection. So your chances of being able to create the conditions for creativity or innovation or psychological safety are pretty limited if you've got people in an untrusting situation. So it is really important to people's performance. It's not just a nice touchy-feely soft thing. It actually really does make a big difference on people's performance. And we know that the intention that you lead into a conversation or just a relationship with makes a big difference. People feel that. And our amygdala picks it up. Oh, okay, they might not be pitch perfect in what they're saying, but their intention is good. I'm going to go with this.
And I think that's why it's important not to pretend. I guess if you want to build trusting relationships, you've got to believe that trusting relationships are important, because that will drive the behavior. And so that intent piece is quite important. Andy, you're going to share a little bit about some of the theory around behind this. So it'd be great to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. So introducing conversation 1. Establishing a trusting relationship. This is really a conversation with a team member to establish or deepen mutual understanding of what drives us, of our preferences, of our motivators or our demotivators at work. Really, in simple terms, it's about understanding what makes each other tick. And our belief here at the Oxford Group is that whether you've known someone for 10 minutes or 10 years, you can always do something to deepen your understanding of what drives them, what motivates them now, as our contexts and motivations can shift over time, depending on the context we're in at that very given time. So this conversation is one of those conversations that needs to be revisited periodically, and it sets a foundation for understanding and maintaining a solid basis of trust. It's important as part of the conversation to understand what trust is, and we refer to the trust equation to help us with this. And the trust equation says a little bit like this: the trust is created by credibility, that what we say is in line with our expertise, so we're not pretending to be something that we're not. Then we've got reliability, and this is that we do what we say we will. We don't overpromise and underdeliver. But also that people generally know what to expect from us in relation to our behavior. So our behavior is also reliable. So we're not that type of manager that I'm sure we've all had, that on a Monday is the most approachable person in the world, most supportive person 1 minute, and then the next day they come across very uncaring or aggressive in character. The final thing is intimacy, and this refers to the creating of a feeling of safety, that you feel that you can share things openly without the fear of it being used against us. And that also there's a closeness and a general care in that relationship. Now, what we know that can detract and destroy trust is if that amygdala senses that someone is just in it for themselves, that they're self-orientated and they don't have our best interests at heart. that can really destroy trust. And this is a really important backdrop to leading our relationships with people at work in terms of these concepts that flow into the trust equation. Another important piece of context is the trust pyramid, and many of you may have seen this before. We've probably heard the saying that trust takes a really long time to build and a very short period of time to break. And whilst there's no shortcut to trust, we are going to share in this conversation how creating the conditions for open conversation and asking the right questions can accelerate you from maybe the surface level stuff in the bottom two quadrants, personal interests and the non-work, trivial chit-chat stuff that we often start our relationships with or start when we meet someone new. Even if we can just jump up into attitudes and motivations, there's a real big prize for what that opens up in terms of data and understanding of one another at work to get the best out of one another. So in the 5 Conversations book, we share much more detail on how to invite people into this conversation. But fundamentally, the setup for the conversation is all about making sure this is a two-way conversation. And the aim of it is to build trust and increase understanding for both parties. Therefore, as a manager or a leader or the person that's instigating this type of conversation, we've got to be the ones that show an openness to share and be open ourselves. And the opening question that we advocate that creates this opportunity could look a bit like this. So, Joe, we haven't had a good chance to connect for a while. I just wanted to create a space for us to understand what makes each other tick a bit more. So what would you like to ask me to help you to understand me a bit better? This then gives Joe, in this case, the opportunity to discuss the areas that are of interest to Joe, rather than me just leading with my biography of what I think Joe might want to know about me. And this is a subtle but important shift in the dynamic. And it shows that we as leaders are open, and to an extent we're vulnerable, and we trust the person enough to give them the autonomy to ask the things that are of interest to them. And by doing this, it makes it really, really easy for me to then step in and ask them some questions that they're probably going to be far more likely to answer openly, having seen me go there and be in that vulnerable position myself. So here's just a few questions, selection of questions that we have in our toolkit that help to understand more about your colleagues, and you can explore different areas that are important. Now, this isn't exhaustive, and generally what we actually find is once you've got 1 or 2 questions going and you're in the flow of the conversation, the natural rhythm will pick up and you'll be able to flow through the conversation and have a genuinely curious exchange with one another. So that's conversation 1 in terms of the backdrop to it. What Maggie and I thought might be quite useful is to do a live conversation 1. So this is a real conversation that Maggie and I are going to pick up. We realized when we started planning for this that we haven't had a structured conversation 1 for probably about 18 months now, and lots has changed. So we thought, let's be brave. Let's lean into that vulnerability that we say is so important in this conversation. So we're just going to run a really short demonstration. I say demonstration, it's actually going to be a real conversation. So,
right.
Maggie,
so Andy, we agreed that I'd go first. So as in to ask you this to set this up. So I get it, and it's pretty timely, Andy, actually, because we've both had changes recently in our roles. We've both stepped into different roles and different changes in our lives. So it's actually generally quite a nice time to have this conversation. So Andy, what would you like to ask me? So let's start off with that one. What would you most like to ask me that will help you to understand me better at this moment?
So I guess one of the things that intrigues me, obviously, with the new role that you stepped into, which is quite different to the role you've had for a number of years, is where are you getting your energy from, Maggie, in this new role? What are the things that are really energizing you and that you're finding intriguing or different?
Yeah. Okay. So just for context, I'm moving from an operational account manager role to a role that's more strategic, and it's got a business development element to it. So in the old role, operational is the key word there, because my energy comes from being busy, from juggling lots of different things, from fighting fires, getting things done, and doing that with people, actually, and for people, in service of people. So traditionally, Andy, that's where my energy comes from, and you probably know that. My new role is more strategic. It's going to require me to think more long term, and probably to slow down a little bit. And I've been really thinking about what that means for me and my energy. And actually, it's maybe I'm being naive, but I don't think it's going to be a major change, because there's something about in service of people still for me. The associate director role, which is about me reaching out to brand new clients, to organizations, to people who've got problems that they need to solve, and which we at the Oxford Group can solve with the work that we do. So that's front of mind for me. So that driver and that energy is still there. And some of the strategic planning that I need to do, I know I'll need to operationalize some of that. So how do I turn that into deadlines for myself that are imminent and important? And I know the bit that'll be important for me is to link that to people. So who am I delivering for? Who needs to know what I'm doing so they can do their part of the job? So it's so my energy will come from the same places. It'll just have a slightly different frame. That's the plan.
Thanks, Maggie. So I think you can get your own back now and ask a question of me if you wish.
Okay, go for it. I will. So I was thinking about you're in a new role as well, but not only are you in a new role, but you've also had a new member of your family. I think it's Ivy, and I think she's probably about 18 months old now. So with those changes, Andy, what's a good day at work look like for you now?
Yeah, very different probably to what it was 18 months. You're pretty much bang on. So I think I have to be far more boundaried than I've ever been before. And it was funny, and I'm sure many parents that are listening will have gone through this experience before, where all of a sudden you realize, God, I used to do a lot of hours outside of work, and now I just can't, because you've got nursery pickups and into the evening routine and bedtime routines, and that's been a real shift, actually. So not being able to, in probably quite a good way, to work some of the longer hours that I did before has meant I've had to like fiercely prioritize what I do on a day-by-day basis. So that's really different. That's really, really different. So I think what does a great day look like now? It's a day when a lot gets done, because a lot needs to get done, but it's also making sure that I've still got time for good quality connection with people, and I've got space to listen. And that can be a challenge at times, because there's lots of actions in any organization nowadays. The pace is really fast, isn't it? So I think for me it's a combination of output, space to listen, engage with people, but also space for my family as well, because that's more important than it's ever been before, really.
Okay, so I guess the day, contact Andy any time of the day or night. I need to put on the back burner, and I guess when I'm connecting with you, helping you with your boundaries too.
Yeah,
So
pushing
yeah,
me back to my boundaries is good, because sometimes I do tend to push them. So that would be great. That'd be helpful.
yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So Andy, that feels like a sort of I guess in real life, and if we had more time, we could go deeper on some of that stuff and actually think about what it means in terms of how we interact, and that probably fits into some of the other conversations that we'll talk about at a later point.
No, absolutely. I mean, just from that initial conversation, we could have carried on for hours there, Maggie. We won't, in the interest of time, but there were so many things that sparked my curiosity in terms of what you were saying. And I could have definitely pushed for some other questions if we had more time. And we generally find that with these types of conversation, that you just spark genuine curiosity and the conversation goes off. And whilst we've got this toolkit of questions, very often once you've got one or two in and you're sparking connections, you don't need to refer to the toolkit.
You don't. And in actual fact, even just making the time for the conversation, even you asking me that question, it's not something I've been thinking too deeply about in terms of the transition. So the question itself is a learning opportunity for me, or almost feels like a coaching opportunity, even certainly to raise my awareness. I guess maybe you've felt the same as you've thought about the question and the answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it forces you to go inwards, doesn't it, and reflect on things that maybe you just don't have time or space to.
Yeah, which I guess is making me think, actually, because we're pretty chatty people, Andy, and we're probably quite self-aware as well. So it could be helpful to prepare maybe these questions, or to let somebody know the questions that you'd like them to ask you, to allow for some preparation or some thinking time ahead. So that's possibly useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Different people got different preferences leading into this type of conversation. Some people like a more structured approach, and even giving the other party the questions and say, look, you pick a few questions from here that you'd like to ask me, and vice versa. That can be a good prompt for some people. Others find that they really wouldn't like that style, and they'd rather just go in with it, a more natural approach. I think creating the space, using the opening question, either will serve you well as long as you've got the right intent leading into the conversation. The intent really is just to understand one another. This conversation is about nothing more than that, really. And it's why we always refer to it as being very simple, but very profound. And that probably leads us on nicely to, well, if it's so simple, but so effective, why does it not happen? What holds people back from having this conversation? And we know there's some legitimate stuff that holds people back. Mainly it's busy. We're crazily busy, and it takes time to create space like this for these types of conversations in our calendar. My favorite saying, Maggie, you've heard me say this a million times before, but a Stephen Covey quote: fast is slow with people. And if you're not creating the space for this type of conversation, then you're not going to be greasing the wheels for things to move much more quickly, from a basis of understanding moving forward. So I think creating a small amount of space will pay off big rewards. But we know that time is a legitimate challenge for many leaders nowadays.
And I think, I guess sometimes you only realize how important this conversation would have been when it's too late, when you should have had it. So and this basis of trust and this mutual understanding of each other becomes important when deadlines are tight, or when you want people to go the extra mile, or when you want to shortcut, and even giving feedback. When you've got this basis of trust, giving feedback, both constructive or positive feedback and developmental feedback, is much easier, because the intent, people already know the intent is there. The reason my manager is telling me this is because they want me to grow. They want me to do a great job. It's not because they hate me and they want to sack me. So when we know the intent is there, lots of conversations and lots of performance related conversations in work are much more powerful. Sometimes when I talk to groups of managers, I'm a facilitator as well as everything else. So I'm in front of groups of managers from lots of different organizations on a regular basis. And when I talk to them about trust and conversations and getting to know your people, one of the pushbacks is, well, I shouldn't be friends with the people I work with, particularly if it's a manager and team member dynamic. And actually that might have been true decades ago, possibly in the way the workplaces were structured. But actually today, we're not asking anybody to be friends with anybody. And, this is not about socializing. This is about genuinely getting to know what drives people, who they are, what they do, how they do it, why they do it. And with that knowledge, we know we can get the best out of people. and it's that intention, and with that belief, it makes this pretty powerful and actually easier to do. It doesn't have to be awkward. It can just be part of your everyday interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And it plays into that piece about how much of your personal self should you reveal at work. And I think we've come a long way since the management school of the 80s and 90s. And we're realizing now that it's important that people understand who we are as individuals and what drives us, what's important to us, sometimes why we behave the way that we behave.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that stuff might feel like it treads the boundary of, my real self and my work self. And I guess the important thing is we talk about the word authenticity. It's a real buzzword that's out there. And the reason authenticity is important is that people detect if you're not being yourself, if you're trying to be something that you're not. And that's a real detractor from trust. And if trust isn't present, then we know that performance probably isn't going to be as present, and innovation and creativity. So I think that there's a hurdle there to get over if you're one of those people that maybe really kind of feels uncomfortable going there. But always remember, you've got the boundaries. You don't need to this isn't about oversharing. This is about sharing what's relevant in the workplace context.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the inclusion agenda as well, Andy, because if that basis of trust, then we can share anything, whoever we are, whatever we do, whatever drives us. It's okay for me to share with my manager, I'm not brilliant at detail, but I will work really hard at ensuring that I get the detail right. And knowing that, my manager knowing that, and I being comfortable sharing that, allows us to put an action plan in place. It allows us to move forward, and that I don't keep tripping over that challenge. So it's we could go on, Andy.
we could go on all day, but we won't in the interest of time. So we hope you enjoyed the conversation there. We hope you enjoyed the framework that we've served up. We hope that's useful for you in your onward conversations. We'd like to say thank you for joining. If you'd like to connect with the Oxford Group, I think we're popping an email address in chat. Feel free to drop any questions to us. You can also sign up for part 2 of this conversation if you haven't already done so, or if you're watching this on YouTube, by the time it's got to a recording, you'll be able to pick up the next in the series from there. So all that leaves us to do is say a big thank you to everybody for your time and attention today, and we hope that the conversation is useful for you.
And goodbye from me.
Take care, everyone.